Race cars come in a variety of shapes and sizes, but as long as it has 4 tires and a steering wheel, my guest tonight has probably driven it to a checkered flag. Since winning his first racing trophy at age 9, Anthony Wayne Stewart has been a mainstay in victory lane. He's won championships in USAC, IndyCar, and 3 times in the NASCAR Cup Series. But before racing in the Indy 500 and the Coca-Cola 600 in the same day, did you know he played trombone in his high school jazz band, worked the McDonald's drive-thru during his early racing days, was nicknamed the Rushville Rocket? Tonight, we'll learn what makes this undeniable icon who he is, a man who once said, "I'm not a race car driver, I'm a racer." Please welcome the man they call Smoke, Tony Stewart. How are you as a passenger seat guy? So somebody else is driving you. How are you?
I can tell you just from the fiance alone, I'm a terrible passenger because I literally feel like I'm taking my life in my own hands every time she drives the car. I've just learned if I can find something to look at on my phone and not see the accident that's coming up, it'd be a lot easier for me.
How close were you growing up to the Indy 500?
Literally 1 hour. A 1 hour drive to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
What was it about cars that all of a sudden you went, this is who I am?
It's easy. That was my dad. That was my dad's influence from day one. I mean, he was a recreation racer. I mean, he didn't make a living doing it. It was a hobby to him. And ever since I can remember as a little kid, we always went to races.
He had go-karts in the garage?
Yeah, when I started racing, we had go-karts in the garage, and I would work on those with him.
How old were you?
I started when I was 8.
What kind of parent was your dad?
He was a warden when I was young. I was not, I don't know, I didn't get in a lot of trouble, but he was pretty stern. I mean, especially when we started racing, he definitely wanted you to focus. No matter what it was we were talking about, what we were doing, why we were doing it, he wanted you to be really focused on it.
Sometimes, though, we do what our dad does to get his attention, or you want love. Was that part of this at all?
No, I just, whatever I could do to keep from getting yelled at, I was happy. So, but that was, you know, at the same time, even though I got yelled at a lot, I mean, I was doing something at the age of 8, 9, 10 with my father that none of my other friends got to do with their fathers. I mean, to go to the racetrack and to travel around to different racetracks with my dad and to learn lessons that, you know, a lot of times when you're a kid, you're just busy being a kid, and you don't really think about the lessons that are being taught to you. You don't realize till later on what you learned. And but the things I learned from my father were, you know, you couldn't put a value to that, and to have that kind of time together. I mean, he was very busy with work. But he always made time for our racing, and that was something that was very important to both of us.
What was your mom like growing up?
She was the polar opposite of my dad. So she was the one that was always happy. When I got in trouble, she would do what she needed to do as a parent, but for the most part, she's the one that's just always sweet and kind and is awesome.
But she said that you were so competitive.
Yeah. When it starts with she said.
She said.
There's nothing good going to come out of this.
That you were so competitive with everything, especially board games. And she said that you wouldn't let her go to bed until you were able to beat her in a board game. How am I doing so far?
That's pretty accurate.
It's pretty accurate.
The sad part is it's still accurate to this day. we still at family functions still play the same board games, and everybody in our family equally hates to lose, but they just know that I hate to lose worse than anybody else. So when I lose, they all take satisfaction in watching the agony of defeat.
Any other sports?
No.
Nothing.
It was always racing with me. It was everything. I mean, that's all, ever since I was a little kid, that's all I ever thought about was racing.
Remember your first sponsor?
At the age of 9, I had Dairy Queen as a sponsor.
So you got to go to Dairy Queen after every race?
Every Saturday night after we raced at the fairgrounds, we loaded up and took about 20 people to Dairy Queen, and whatever trophy we won that night, whether we won or finished third or whatever, it went on the counter and stayed there till the end of the year. But I thought I was the coolest kid in the world because I got a $1 free chocolate shake every Saturday night. And I would sit there and my buddies would have to pay for theirs, and I got mine in my hand and didn't have to pay for it.
12 years old, you win a championship?
It was actually the first time we ever left our home track at our local fairgrounds. We drove to Oskaloosa, Iowa in 1983. And we get to this racetrack, and it was first class for a go-kart track. You know, normally at the track we raced at home, we had 10, 12 kids that we raced against. Here we had 20 some odd kids that we were racing against, and I knew none of them. So it was the first time that I ever got to race outside of our home track, raced with totally new guys, and a track that I'd never been to.
What was that feeling like, that first win?
I knew that one was big. I mean, because we had planned on going to that race for months. Then I realized from Mark Dismore, who we bought our parts from at the time, from him and his family and my father, how big this race really was and what it was going to mean. There was a point where my parents mortgaged their house just so we had money to go race go-karts.
And how old are you?
Probably 12, 13 years old. But the problem was you can mortgage the house for it, but go-kart races give you trophies. You're not making money that's putting it back into the house. So,
did you realize they had mortgaged the house? That second mortgage here?
I didn't understand what a mortgage was at that age even, but when I realized that it was putting us in a financial bind doing that, it didn't even come across my mind why we were in a financial crunch, but it put us in a bind after we did that.
Your dad had to see something special in you to do that. What did he say?
It was either that or he just was insane and didn't realize what he was doing. But I don't know. I think every father wants to think their son can be the next Jeff Gordon or Jimmy Johnson. Or I don't know. I really don't know what my father really saw. I think we just enjoyed going racing together.
When did you know that you were good?
I just knew I was having fun doing what I was doing. I mean, it's the racing ladder is kind of like the business ladder. I mean, you start at the bottom and you work your way up. And so I was just having fun doing what I was doing. And luckily we were winning races at the same time, and that created more opportunities. But I think in '94 when we won our first national championship with the United States Auto Club, that was the first time that I was like, we might be something. We got the opportunity to drive for a local guy in town that had built a brand new car and didn't have a lot of money to run it. And I didn't have money to give him to drive it, but my dad gave him $500 for me to run 5 races in it. And we won 2 of the 3 races and ran second in one of them, so the guy kept me. But to have a job to where I could at least make money and gas money and everything I needed to do, I had to work somewhere, so I worked at McDonald's. I mean, I did every job they had at McDonald's. And in that time period when I was racing 3/4 midgets, I worked day maintenance. So I would come in at 4 o'clock in the morning and work till noon. And that would give me the evenings off to go race. And there were times that I would get in at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning from a race and literally get in the shower, get changed, and go to work.
At what point does Jeff Gordon come on your radar that he has money or he has sponsors?
I actually saw Jeff Gordon race at Bloomington, which is a town 30 minutes from my house. But I watched Jeff Gordon run a wing sprint car when he was 16 years old. And I was 16 years old. And I'm like, man, that's what I want to do. I want to be where he is. Why did he get to do that?
So you were aware of Jeff Gordon's greatness?
Yeah, absolutely.
Were you jealous?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, who wasn't? I mean, anybody that wanted to be a race car driver was, if you were around that age, you were definitely jealous of Jeff.
And this is a money sport. How hard was it for you at that time, where you're struggling, trying to make ends meet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still lived at home with my mom. My parents had divorced by then. It was my mom and sister and I. And I used to get in so much trouble because I would call car owners left and right trying to get rides to drive their cars. Well, there weren't any of them local, so everything was long distance. So literally my paycheck went to paying for gas money and the telephone bill.
How desperate were you to get from one track to another? Because you're racing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
At the time.
We always had T-shirts that we would sell at the races. And after the races were over, the fans would come down in the pit area. And there were times that if you had a bad night, we would literally stay till they would shut the lights off and make us leave. If there was anybody that was even remotely interested in what we had, that was a lot of times the difference between making it to the next track and not making it, was selling one more shirt to have that $20 for gas money to get to the next race.
What kind of cars are we racing at this time?
So sprint cars, and then what they call midgets, which is a 4-cylinder car that's a little smaller than a sprint car. That's what we raced a lot in California. We raced at Bakersfield, we raced in Hanford, we raced Ventura, and those were the races when we came out west and ran the TV races. That's when people really started noticing who we were.
But you would do anything to race?
Yeah, absolutely.
And at that time, you still don't have money.
No. Working every crap job you can imagine. I mean, I worked at a ski resort in the summer that had go-karts and an out. I know that. I have to really quickly go. They had go-karts and an alpine slide, but yeah, it was. I mean, you worked really bad jobs. I sealed parking lots in the middle of the night. I drove a wrecker for a buddy of mine that had a couple tow trucks, and
how do you keep the dream alive here?
Just keep going. I mean, it was literally just it was whatever money you had was spent to do what you were doing.
You didn't have a plan B?
No. Thank God.
Where would you be without racing?
I have no clue. I honestly have no clue.
Do you have any other talents?
No. No. That's it. That's it.
You won the Triple Crown. Explain the Triple Crown, the importance of that. I think you were the first person to win the Triple Crown in USAC.
So the Triple Crown, the United States Auto Club has 3 national divisions. They have the Midget Series, the Sprint Car Series, and Silver Crown Series. And we ended up winning all 3 national championships in the same year. And
that doesn't happen.
We were actually the second driver to ever win all 3 divisions, but we were the first to win them all in 1 year.
What did that mean for your popularity or potential sponsors or team owners coming after you?
Oh, it was huge. It was huge.
That was the difference?
We had done something nobody had done in the sport. You know, nobody had ever won all 3 championships in one season. And, you know, I'd been working with Lauren Ranier for a year up to that point, and his father was the one that owned the 28 Hardee's car that Cale Yarborough drove in NASCAR. And they got out of the sport and were coming back in, and his son Lauren was and is a great scout, a great talent scout when it comes to race car drivers. And I remember he came to a lot of races, and we spent a lot of time together, and we're working on trying to get something put together to go to NASCAR in '96. And so winning the Triple Crown in that year that we were working on all this just fell right into play. But at the same time, then Tony George developed the IRL, which is the IndyCar series. And I had tested with A.J. Foyt, so I get to test for my all-time hero.
And here's the legend of the sport.
Yeah, and the guy that was my hero ever since I could remember as a kid. And I made it through the test. He offered me the job to race in the IRL the next year, and like I said, I'd been working with the Ranier family to do something in NASCAR. And so I asked the Ranier family, I said, hey, would you be upset if I ran these 5 races for AJ and then ran whatever races you wanted on the side? Because they didn't want to run a full-time schedule that first year. They were all for it. AJ, on the other hand, was not all for it. He said, you're either racing for me or nothing. And I'd put a year of investment into working with these guys, and it was coming along really well for the NASCAR side. So I actually had to turn my all-time hero down on an opportunity to race for him.
How was that conversation?
That was one of the hardest decisions I ever made in my life. But it was, I went to Australia that winter. I got hired to run a midget over in Australia for 3 weeks. And while I was over there, I actually signed my first NASCAR contract with the Raniers. And literally the day that I got home from Australia, Kerry Agajanian called. And, you know, Kerry's family had been involved in racing for years. And Kerry goes, you need to be on the first plane you can be on tomorrow to go to Orlando. Why am I going to Orlando? He goes, you're testing an IndyCar for Team Menard. So I literally got home on a Sunday, was on an airplane Monday morning at 7:30 and flew down. That's when they had the racetrack at Disney World. That's where they were going to run the first IRL race.
Give us a sense of getting behind the wheel of one of these cars. How complicated is it?
Well, everything about it was complicated for me because I'd never even been around one other than just a couple test days, and they kept it very simple. Then all of a sudden you go down and I show up at the racetrack, and Eddie Cheever's driving the car. He tests the whole first day, and so I kind of just stand back and watch and listen and meet the crew guys. And I remember having my uniform on, and it was just like the opening scene of Days of Thunder. I was standing at the wall, had my helmet in my hand, my gloves in my hand, and Eddie Cheever gets out of the car at noon after he gets done with his test, literally climbs over the wall, pokes me in the chest, and he goes, if you crash this car or put a scratch on, I'm going to kill you. Never said a word to me the whole time I was there. That was the first words he said to me, and turned around and walked off and went straight to the airport. So I'm scared to death getting in this car. Like, if I do anything, this guy, I wasn't really scared that he was going to kill me because I was pretty sure I could kick his ass, but I didn't want to have to be in that position. But yeah, what really made him mad was when I went a tenth of a second faster than he did at the end of the day.
Nice.
So it was a good test.
But you're getting in. How did they know that you could drive this?
Everybody had known that we did the test with AJ, but
you've driven all these different cars, but now you're behind something like these are big boys, big boy cars.
This was a 950 horsepower turbocharged rear engine car, and everything I'd driven, the motors were in front of me. Now to get in something where the motor's behind me and you're way down in it was completely different than running dirt tracks in Indiana.
Put us in the cockpit. What's it look like? The instrument panel?
It was crazy because you have an electronic dash, and there were buttons there that I literally did not know what the buttons did. And most of them I didn't know what they did.
And they're not labeled?
No, not at all. They're just different colors and this and that. But there's bars that you can change all kinds of settings on sway bars in the car and boost knobs and everything else. So, I mean, they literally would have to, it was so overwhelming. I couldn't remember everything in such a short amount of time because when we did the test, all I did was drive the car.
But you have to learn on the job, and it can be a painful lesson learning on the job in driving.
Yeah. I've got plenty of titanium rods and screws in my body to prove that.
Any fear when you get behind the wheel?
No.
Are you allowed to have fear?
Well, I think there's a little bit of it that is constructive, keeps you from making really bad mistakes, but I think that's more learned than it is natural. I mean, I never got behind the wheel of a race car and was scared to be in the race car. I think the fear is that you're not going to be fast, if there's any fear at all.
Let's take a look at your first IRL race. It takes place in Orlando.
Back at the front of the field, Buddy Lazier, the purple 91 car, and that's Tony Stewart in the 20 car. That bright yellow and orange machine closing up, coming by, and Tony Stewart is going for the lead, and he's got it. Boy, there's the dream of the short trackers come true. And now Calkins makes his move on Stewart, and boy, he just comes around him. Now, yellow out. We've got two cars into the wall in turn one.
Boy, that's
turn one, 11 laps to go.
Did you see what happened up there? Tony Scott went around between the wall and Scott Sharp. He went between them. He's got to be careful whether he picks up a bump.
The emergency vehicle blocked him, and he had to go up through there. And he decided, if he had to treat it like a dune buggy or a tank, go over that stuff around.
Yeah, but
I don't blame him.
Calkins chased by Stewart. This is a run to the finish at a brand new racetrack. Walt Disney World Speedway, and Buzz Calkins has taken it. And Tony Stewart comes up and gives him a salute as he finishes in second place.
Pretty impressive. Second place.
It wasn't bad for a first race in an Indy car. I was beyond ecstatic about the finish of that. But that wreck, where the scary part is, and I didn't realize it, it's my first IndyCar race. I have no clue that the carbon fiber body parts are really sharp, and to drive over that wreckage could have cut a tire down. Well, those cars at that speed, if the tire goes down, you're going to crash. And we literally were within, I think we had 6 laps to go when we took the green. And Larry Curry is like, "Did you run over anything?" I said, "Yeah, I ran over a lot of stuff." He goes, "Do you think you have a flat?" I said, "I have no idea. I have no clue." I said, "It doesn't feel like anything's flat. It doesn't feel like any tire's soft," but I wasn't sure I would have known what a soft tire felt like anyway. But luckily, I mean, literally, they looked at the tires after the race, and there were a couple slices in it that didn't go deep enough into the tread to create a problem. But I mean, it could have been the difference between running second and me being a second team in our car that crashed.
So you've established success in IRL, but what are your goals right now?
At that point, we didn't know what was going to happen in the IRL. It was a new league. They went from 5 races to 11 races the second season. I had a 3-year contract with Menard to drive there, and then after the first year with Rainier, I pretty much crashed every race car that we had on the NASCAR side that first year. I just couldn't get it figured out.
Why?
And I don't know. I don't know what was wrong. I just never, I think a lot of it was all the tires that I had raced on up to that point are what they call a bias ply tire versus the IndyCar tires and the NASCAR tires were a radial tire. So they had a lot stiffer feel to it. And when it would break free and lose traction, it was like when it went, it just went. And I didn't see it coming like I would a bias ply tire. And it took me a little longer to get used to those tires.
You had no control over it.
Well, I just, for some reason, couldn't get the feel of it. And, you know, finally one day it clicked and it all started coming around, but it took a little longer to get used to those tires than anything.
So competitively, you have to look at this, that I want championships now.
Oh, yeah. That was probably some of the most fun that I ever had in racing was that period of time because I had a NASCAR job. I had my IndyCar ride. I was still racing midgets and sprint cars and anything that I could get in. But to be able to be an IndyCar and NASCAR at the same time, nobody was doing that.
So you're on the verge of your first IRL championship, and this is how it played out for Tony.
Here we go with the battle for the championship. Green is out. Here we go. Both Hamilton side by side. Everybody crowds up behind Stewart and Robbie Buell. And there goes Salazar under Hamilton. Here comes Stewart trying to get Hamilton as well. Hamilton has to keep Stewart well behind him. Salazar comes off the corner. He'll see that white flag. Tony Stewart's going to bring it a little easier too. Boy, oh boy, this championship comes right down to the wire while Tony Stewart takes the championship. They got to be celebrating down in the Menard pits as well with Tony Stewart.
See, that is proof that I was skinny at one time. So.
But it wasn't long ago you're working at McDonald's.
Yeah.
And here you are, champion. What'd your dad say about that moment?
That was a proud father. That was one of the few times I ever saw my father cry. So that was a moment that was pretty special. I think the only time before that I'd ever seen him cry was September of the year before at Las Vegas when I crashed. But that was a pretty cool moment to go from the worst injury up to that point that I'd ever had in a race car, and then to go a year later at the same racetrack and win the championship was pretty amazing.
You signed with Joe Gibbs. When did you realize this relationship was going to be special?
I think in '99 was my first year in the Cup Series with him, driving for Home Depot. That first year was amazing, and that was the year that I really, I finally got to race against Jeff Gordon. I got to race against Dale Earnhardt Sr., Rusty Wallace, all these big guys that I'd looked up to. This was my chance to finally race with those guys.
Tony Stewart, who led 225 of the 500 laps at Bristol, has caught Jeff Gordon. Didn't take him long.
No, it didn't. Boy, does he have a great race car tonight.
A rookie has not won a NASCAR Winston Cup race since 1987. Here comes Tony Stewart off the corner. And in his 25th NASCAR Winston Cup race, Tony Stewart wins at Richmond International Raceway. Becomes the first rookie in Winston Cup racing to win since Davey Allison at Dover.
See, I was still skinny.
Yeah. I didn't like that angle there, but no.
But I saw you really looking really hard.
I looked a little longer than I should have.
I appreciate you appreciating me.
How did that feel?
It was awesome. I mean, every Sunday I turned on the TV and was watching all the NASCAR races. Even when I was racing go-karts, that was what you did. I mean, well, we hadn't won a race at that point, but we had led 333 laps of 400-lap race, and that race alone gave me the confidence that I could. And every time we made a pit stop, I would drop back. I would get the lead. We'd come into the pits. I would come out 6th, and then have to pass those guys, and I would pass them every restart. I would finally work my way back to the front. And every time I did that, it just gave me more confidence during the race.
Satisfaction of beating Gordon?
Loved it. Loved it. I mean, he didn't want me beating him, and of course I wanted to beat him. So, to finally get in a position where, pass him for the lead and win a race was something I looked forward to.
How was it hatched that you were going to do Brickyard and the Coca-Cola in the same day, a total of 1,100 miles?
Larry Curry, who was our competition director at Menard, and myself and another gentleman formed TriStar Motorsports and had our own IndyCar team together. And so the big part of that was they wanted me to run the Indy 500 that day. So you go to Indianapolis, you run the 500, and then you fly down to Charlotte and you run the Coca-Cola 600 that evening.
Why was it so important to you?
Because Indy was important to me. The Indianapolis 500, ever since I was a kid, I mean, that was the race that I wanted to win. And so I had a 3-year contract with Menard, and the first year there, I led the first 44 laps of the race and blew a motor. Ran 5th the year before, but still didn't win it. So I wanted to go back and try to win that race one time. And so when we had our team, it was like, I'll come run the 500. And I had to get Gibbs to sign off on this, which was hard because...
Yeah, he said he wasn't pleased.
No. Well, there were a lot of things I did that didn't please Joe. But, Joe was still in that football coach mentality of, he didn't want just like you don't want your football players going out playing flag football in a park game, worried about them getting hurt. He was A, worried about me getting hurt, then B, worried about me not getting down there in time to start the race, because you have to start the race to get the points.
How are you feeling after 500?
Terrible. I was so worried about being dehydrated that all I did all race morning was just drink water. And then when we started the 600, it was really, really hot that day. Toward the end of the race, the last 100 miles of the race, I needed to be anywhere but inside a race car. I was wore out. I was hot, tired, but we finished 4th.
Yeah, so you went 9th, 4th, and the first driver to ever finish both of these races.
Yeah, we had the record at that time at running 1,090 miles in one day.
In 2001 Daytona, you end up crashing. The sport lost Dale Earnhardt Sr. in that race. Looking back on that, what do you remember about your crash?
All I remember, we were 3 wide coming off of turn 2. I was the car on the very bottom. I think Robbie Gordon was next to me and Ward Burton was outside of him, or vice versa. But whoever the outside guy was hit the wall. They came off, hit the guy next to him. That guy hit me, and it turned me to the right in the wall. And that's the first thing I remembered after hitting the wall was the car being stopped and kind of coming to and not really knowing what's going on. And Bobby Labonte is staring at me through the window going, "Are you all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." He goes, "If we got to cut the top off, we can cut the top off." And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to hurt the car. He goes, "I don't think you need to worry about that." I had no idea what had just happened and what the status was. But I said, "What happened?" He goes, "You landed on top of me." Well, I was running 3rd. He was running 23rd. And I landed on top of him. But I had no idea. I said,
it was pretty
He goes, "I'll
horrific.
tell you about it later."
Yeah. You go to the hospital. Mm-hmm. When you're in the hospital, when do you find out that Dale Earnhardt Sr. is in an accident?
When they accidentally rolled me in the same room he was in. So I had already been there. They had done all the scans on me. They went to put me back in a room, and they had already put Dale in the same room. They accidentally put me in there, and I was only in there a second, but I knew when I saw Dale it wasn't good.
How's that affect you?
I thought I had a bad day. I realized that my bad day wasn't a bad day at all.
And if you see the crashes, yours is horrific. Senior, just when he crashes at the angle that he crashes in.
That was, in that accident, after Dale's accident, sparked a whole new revolution in driver safety in our sport. But at that time, when we didn't have soft walls, we didn't have head and neck restraints. And like I said, my crash looked a lot worse than his. He went and he hit with such force and it just stopped. Mine just kept going and going and going, and it dissipated the energy. I had one cut and a bunch of bruises, and his was a lot more dramatic.
So 2002, you have 3 wins. You set your sights on winning the Cup.
Yeah, I think 10 weeks from the end of the season, we were right there. It was us and Mark Martin. And you know, it just seemed like every week you literally didn't care about anybody else where you finished. I mean, you wanted to win the race each week, but wherever we finished, after we got out of the car, it's like, where did Mark finish? And you're trying to compare how many points you either gained or how many you lost if he beat you. So I was a basket case because it literally was down to Mark and I. I mean, one of the two of us was going to win it. Nobody else mathematically could even win the race.
This is how it ended at Homestead that season.
We're in the final laps of the final race of the NASCAR Winston Cup season. Tony Stewart leading Mark Martin by 57 points in the championship. Tony Stewart working his way through the traffic. And Tony Stewart will be one lap away from finishing off with a champion's celebration. The Rushville Rocket from Indiana is the 2002 NASCAR Winston Cup champion.
And a big sigh of relief.
And Tony Stewart is now just the 25th man in history to wear a NASCAR Winston Cup champion's ring. Who'd have thought at lap 3 of the Daytona 500 Tony Stewart would be champion? But when it's all said and done, after 14,353 miles of racing, Tony Stewart's the champion.
How'd that feel?
That was awesome. I mean, that's, you know, obviously getting in the sport and winning my first race in '99, that was your goal after that. And we finished it off with winning a championship. So.
All right, the next couple of years feels like there's some friction going on with your team members. What's going on personally, or what's behind all of this?
When you're a competitor and you win, it's like feeding a beast. All you want to do is win more. So I felt a lot of pressure after winning that first championship that I needed to back it up. And it just seemed like the next couple of years I couldn't do anything right. It's like I got in a portion where we had a slump, and then it got to the point where I was trying so hard to make things happen that I was forcing mistakes that I shouldn't have forced myself into. But I forced myself into mistakes, got into it with other drivers, you name it. It was a bad period.
Who kind of brought you back to your senses?
Well, I think it was a combination of people. I mean, Joe was a good calming influence, the best he could be. I got invited to the NASCAR hauler a lot, that's like going to the principal's office at school. So when you finish the race and they say, yeah, you need to go to the hauler, it's like, oh, shit. You know, and so when you saw Mike Helton in there, that was the principal, and he didn't smile, and he didn't joke around, and they always had the same seat for me, which ended up becoming my seat in the hauler. When they got their new trailer, they embroidered my name on that seat. So, you know, I spent a lot of time with Mike, and Mike was actually the one, I think, that of most people that was around me at the time, Mike was able to kind of put things in perspective and eventually start calming me down a little bit.
And at the time, your crew chief, I think, helped a lot.
Yeah, Zipadelli was, Zippy was, he was like my big brother. And I mean, we would argue on the radio during races, and you would think that when the race was over, we were going to kill each other. But 9 times out of 10, when I would get wound up, he would notice it, and he would see it coming, and he would say something to try to kind of get me to reset in the car.
Are you enjoying racing at this time?
No, not at all. It had become a job. And like I said, the pressure to perform at that time in the sport was incredible. I mean, it was, like I said, after you win a championship, you feel like if you're not winning races and not winning championships, that you're going the other direction. You're going backwards.
Did you ever talk to other drivers about that pressure? Was there anybody, an elder driver, veteran driver?
Mike Wallace came to me one day, and I didn't know Mike, and Mike's Rusty Wallace's brother. And he came over to my motorhome, and he goes, hey, can I talk to you? I'm like, yeah. So we went outside, and we sat in 2 lawn chairs outside the motorhome, and he told me a story about his first son. And he was backing out of his driveway and backed over his son and killed his son. And he goes, I don't know what's bothering you. He goes, I know something's bothering you. He goes, whatever it is, it's not that bad. And I have never forgot that conversation. And Mike and I are great friends. But you know, for him to come, nobody made him come, nobody reached out to him. I mean, he just noticed I was struggling. And, you know, for him to come and tell me his story was, it put a lot of things in perspective. He's like, you know, you get to do what millions of people want to do every week, drive a race car.
How did it change you as a driver?
It just put it in I think it just helped me focus, and it took a lot of the pressure off. I'd forgot why I was driving race cars and why when I was 8 years old, I started driving race cars.
What's the next goal? Brickyard 400?
Yeah, you know, when those attempts to win the Indy 500 went away, the next best option for an Indiana driver is to win the Brickyard 400 at Indy. So that was, every year that was my Indy 500 again.
How much pressure are you putting on yourself to win that?
All of it. Every bit of pressure that you can think of was, I carried around 1,000 pounds on my shoulder of pressure every Brickyard.
Jeff Gordon won the first Brickyard 400. 2005, this is how it ended.
Well, he laid back and got that run between 1 and 2.
Kane trying to hold him off, can't do it. Side by side in front of his sweep. They sweep into 2 and onto the backstretch. Tony Stewart takes the lead at Indy. Stewart has been the Nextel Cup bad boy for so many years until this year. Through turn 4, the last trip down the front stretch. Tony Stewart, a native Hoosier, his dream comes true. Tony Stewart wins the All-State 400 at the Brickyard. Let the party begin.
Folks, there's one happy race car driver.
He's interested in the ladder.
Is that a little shout out to Helio Castroneves?
Yeah, Helio started that. That is proof that fat guys do not need to be climbing fences. By then, I'd started gaining some weight. You know, what was really cool about that race was we had a suite in turn 2, and the turn 2 suite is literally less distance from here to the wall. It's literally about 15 feet from the balcony of the suite to the edge of the racetrack. And the level where our suite was, when I came through turn 2, I could see our suite every lap because where my focal point is, or was, to the center of the corner, literally right above that was where our suite was. And my dad was right on the railing for 160 laps.
How cool is that?
Never moved. It was really cool except for one lap. I was leading and I came off of turn 2 right in front of him and got really sideways, got really loose and about lost the car. And I remember coming around the next lap and my dad is about to fall over the railing. He's leaning forward over the railing, pointing to my head like, think. And I'm in the car like, hey, dumbass, I've been doing this my whole life. You know, I don't need you telling me how to drive right now. I got this. Just let me drive. And he's not even talking to me. But I mean, he might as well have had a radio that day.
What do you think it meant to him?
Oh God, I think it meant every bit as much to him as it did to me to win that. When we raced together, we always raced with the bare minimum. We didn't have funding to have extra spares and extra motors and extra tires. We made do with what we had. And I think that was just, for him, it was what all that was about. It was the end point of what his vision was initially. It was what we started together and what he knew could happen. And to me, along the journey, it was just the journey. To him, it was the end of the journey of this was the goal, was to win at this place.
You had 5 wins that year. You win the Cup again. So how's your disposition, personality?
A lot better. You know, we had a lot of other things going on racing-wise outside of the Cup Series. I was a car owner in 2 different dirt track teams that I owned and had a lot of things going on outside the car, but it was, you know, it wasn't that bad around then.
2008, you have to have a conversation with Joe Gibbs that you're going to be leaving him to become an owner. How's that conversation take place?
I remember the night before I went to talk to him and could not sleep because if it weren't for Joe, I would never have had the race teams that I have on the side, a lot of the projects and a lot of the things that I had done up to that point, I did with the knowledge of what I learned from Joe and how he did business and how he ran his teams.
What happened?
He was furious because
And Joe's demeanor is...
He's pretty calm most of the time. But Joe's a big guy still. I mean, Joe's 6 foot tall and big hands and big head, and he can get animated, and I had never seen him that mad. I'd seen him mad a lot.
Well, people said this was career suicide for you.
Yeah, everybody did. Everybody but Rick Hendrick, and it was Rick Hendrick's fault. He was the one that, I remember him calling me and saying, hey, I got something that you might be interested in.
But what's this need to own?
I think you have to look outside of driving the race car and saying, one day I'm not going to drive a race car. What am I going to do? And ever since I was a little kid, all I thought about was racing. I didn't have a backup plan. So I knew in my heart that the day I quit driving race cars wasn't going to be the end of my racing career. I was going to do something in racing. And this was a really good opportunity to, and this was the part of the conversation that I had with Joe that actually calmed him down a little bit, and because he couldn't do anything about it. He goes, why do you want to do this? And he kept asking over and over, why do you want to do this? And I told him, I said, this is my opportunity to be you. And he stopped. He couldn't, there was nothing he could say after that. And that was really what I was thinking.
He told me, he said, up until that point, he had your attention and he thought that maybe you were going to reconsider. But when you said, I want to be you, Joe, he said, how could I not let him do what he really wants to do? That Joe thought maybe I'm being selfish here. If that's what he wants to do and he wants to be who I am, isn't that a compliment?
I would have liked to have started that conversation with that quote because, I mean, I felt like I was this tall during that whole conversation until I said that to him. And when he stopped, it was like it flipped the switch. And how do you try to discourage somebody from trying to do what you've done?
2009, new car, new number, new you?
Yeah, it scared me. I sat there every day going, what have I done? But it was what I had learned from Joe that let me go there, go through the process that we went through starting this, and taking an existing team and bringing in new people. It was such a humbling feeling to see guys that I knew were important people in the industry that left existing organizations that they'd been with for a long time to come be a part of this with us. And those people are what changed the complexion of that race team.
So 2011, you accumulate points to get into the chase with a chance to win the Cup.
But yeah, we won 5 of the last 10 races going into Homestead, but you're sitting there and you're trying to think of how do you get, I'd been in that position numerous times of running for championships, and Carl had a couple occasions where he was running for championships as well. One of the two of us was going to win it. Nobody else mathematically could even win the race. But you realize that psychological warfare is a very valuable tool when it comes to that last race, because I'd been in that position enough times to know that doesn't matter how good things were going into it, that last race always feels different than a normal race. It plays out different than a normal race.
What are the kind of mind games that are being played here?
Well, Carl and I got along just fine.
Well, he's such a nice guy.
Yeah, it's hard to not get along with Carl. But I sent him a picture because I had a German Shepherd, and he was sponsored by Aflac, and they had those little stuffed animal ducks. And we took one of the ducks that they were passing out at the racetrack, and we took a black Sharpie and we blackened one of its eyes. We took Band-Aids and put it on its wing, and I had it in the dog's mouth and took a picture and sent it to Carl the night before the race. I said, just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. So he didn't respond.
This is how it ended at Homestead that season.
For 2, a head-to-head fight in the final race of the season for the championship. The Ford 400 is underway. Just joining us, Stewart had a hole punched in the grill opening on the bottom of that car and went from 8th all the way back to 40th, making repairs.
They're going to feel like after we fix their after this. Oh, yes, this is not over.
We see Tony Stewart dive from the inside. He's going to try to make this pass.
3 wide right in front of them. How about 4 wide? Stewart to the bottom.
Wow.
Up front, Truex, 56. Stewart for the lead in the 14.
That guy's on a mission.
Final lap. Stewart and Edwards, first and second. On Thursday, Tony Stewart said he'd wreck his mother for a championship. 2002, he was the champion. 2005, he was the champion. He's become a 3-time NASCAR Sprint Cup champion. Tony Stewart wins it. Truly a classic championship fight. Resulted in a truly classic championship finale where you had to win the race to win the title.
Would you really have wrecked your mother?
My mom knows I would wreck her to win a championship.
You would?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't wreck her to hurt her, but I would wreck her, for sure.
You win 2 cups with Coach Gibbs. How important is that third one, to do it on your own?
You know, you can't take anything away from any time you win a championship because they're all special. But to win the third one with my own team and the way that we won it was, I mean, I don't know that you could ever, if you ever took one race and scripted it for a movie, that would be the race that you would script for a movie.
I want to bring up your quote because I'd like for you to try to define it for us, where you said that you're not a race car driver, I'm a racer. What does that mean?
You know, there's people that are race car drivers, but, you know, there's people that are mechanics that I say are racers. And there's people that are track owners and promoters. And I just feel like I'm one of those guys that just being a race car driver doesn't define me in the sport. You know, I'm still a race fan. I still go to races when I have chance and watch races as a fan and love it just like a spectator and a race fan does. I'm a car owner now. I'm a track owner now. I'm a series owner, and I have the cup teams. So I'm engrossed in the sport. I'm not just a race car driver. I'm a racer. I have a lot of different angles to my life now.
August 9th, 2014, track in upstate New York. You're driving, dirt track, and Kevin Ward ends up dying. He gets out of his car, and your car hits him, and he dies. What do you want us to know about that night?
My worst enemy, I hope they would never be put in the position I got put in that night. I remember passing Kevin, and I remember half a lap later, the caution comes out. And we come around, and I see his car, and I was looking because I'm like, that's the guy I just passed. And I'm like, we didn't touch each other, and I was trying to figure out what happened and trying to figure how bad it was, if he was gonna, you know, he had a flat tire for sure. I'm like, I was looking at his car trying to see if, you know, he was gonna be able to get it fixed. And look up, and there he is on the racetrack. I had no idea he was out of his race car.
When did you know he had died?
I knew, so after we made contact, they have one-way radios that we run, and they're screaming red on the radios, so everybody's to stop. And so I'm past them, and they're behind me, and I can't see what's going on. And the guy that was the series owner came up on a four-wheeler. I said, "Is he all right?" He goes, "It doesn't look very good. It's pretty bad." And so they pushed everybody off the racetrack, and I knew at that point it was really bad.
You settled a wrongful death lawsuit April of 2018. You can't get closure on something like that, but how do you move? You know, you still have to drive. How does that affect you as a driver?
There were so many moments outside the car when you weren't busy that you were always thinking about it. And you're always thinking about what and if I'd have been looking here, not there.
Because it's one thing to affect you as a driver. Obviously, as a person,
well,
you can't hide from it.
No, and you can't change it. And that was the worst part about it. There was nothing I could do to change what happened. And it's like you sit there and you try to rerun it in your mind over and over, and then you see the media get a hold of it, and then you read comments that on social media that people are writing, and then you start questioning what you saw and what happened. You start questioning it off of what other people that weren't in the car and weren't even at that track are saying. And you catch yourself getting engrossed in all that.
Did you talk to your parents about that?
Absolutely.
Any advice from them?
How could a parent have any advice for that? It's, like I say, it's a scenario that my most bitter, worst enemy in the world, I wouldn't want them to have to go through that. I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through that. It's, you can't replace a life. And if I'd have known that was going to be the outcome of that night, I'd have stayed in Watkins Glen and raced the Cup race the next day and skipped that night of racing, because I was there to have fun. And then this happens.
You win one more race, 2016, your final 3 seasons with NASCAR. How tough was it to walk away from NASCAR as a driver?
I think when that time comes, everybody's reasons are different.
Are you officially retired?
No. I never said I was retiring from anything. I just quit driving in NASCAR and went back to driving dirt track cars.
Will you drive in a NASCAR race again?
I would say it's possible. I might do a one-off race here or there.
What's next for you, aside from a one-off?
Well, at this point in my season, I've ran 63 races already this year and should have ran probably 70 except for rainouts where the weather got us. But, you know, I'm having a blast racing still. And everybody jokes with me. I'm busier now than I've ever been. You know, I breed whitetail deer in Indiana. I've been working on my fishing lake. You name it, we're into it. And but I'm gone racing all the time, and I love it. I mean, it's what I love doing.
You have a fishing pond inside your house?
No, not a fishing pond, but I have if you've ever been inside of a Bass Pro Shops or a Cabela's and see those big tanks,
yeah,
I have a 5,600-gallon tank inside my house.
Now, do you fish in that?
No.
You just have fish in there?
If you have to fish in that tank, it means you are not really a very good fisherman.
Okay.
That's like it's technically shooting fish in a barrel.
Okay.
So
you have fish. You just don't fish for the fish there. You go outside.
I go
of the
outside,
pond.
yeah.
Okay.
I try to do it the traditional way.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure. All right, got some fun questions. What pisses you off?
How much time do we have? Just because we're in LA right now, anybody that owns a Prius pisses me off. Because anybody that drives a Prius and sits in the fast lane and runs the speed limit really pisses me off. They must not have mirrors in Priuses.
What's on your playlist that we might be embarrassed that we would be hearing? Or that you would know we would be hearing?
My fiance caught me, and I just had it playing random songs. I didn't have a playlist, and an ABBA song came on there, and I was like, oh my God. I was driving, of course, and she goes, like, oh boy.
What makes a great racer?
I think, and we've seen a lot of them, but it takes kind of racers to recognize it. When you have a guy that has a car that maybe a 5th place running car, it's not a car that should win the race, and that guy can take it and figure out how to make it win, that's a racer.
It's a long way from go-karts, dirt tracks, 3 Winston Cup Series championships, and now you're an owner, and maybe not done driving. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Stewart.